So, how many of you have seen the movie that we're discussing today, Liane? Raise your hand, because I want to see how we are. So, most people have seen it. Okay. If you haven't seen it, please know that we showed it here on Friday night. We've been promoting it as kind of the basis of our lesson today. And as I said earlier, this idea of a message based on a movie came from one of my mentors, Reverend Eric Odell, out in Seattle. Every summer he does this. He picks a movie several weeks of the summer. They show it at the center during the week, and then he talks about it on Sunday. So I decided to bring this to my community too. So I'm really, really glad that most of you participated. Because one of the things that I became acutely aware of as I became a minister is that spiritual truth is illustrated everywhere. It's taught in every format by pretty much anyone sharing wisdom of any kind. They're telling big stories. Spiritual truth is a part of those stories. And I listen for it in the songs that I hear. I watch for it in movies and the spirituality that's in books that I read that aren't even spiritually based. I'm looking for it all the time. I watch to see how characters in stories reflect spiritual truth and how life works on a spiritual level. And I wonder, are the characters using spiritual law unintentionally as they navigate the situations that they're in? So first of all, I want to explain what I mean by spiritual truth. So we believe that life, that the life that is God. That's what we believe. And that life that is God is in everyone and everything. And that we are a part of this energetic universe that responds to us, that responds to how we think, how we choose, what we say. And so it was a delight to watch this movie from that perspective. And it fits perfectly with our July theme. Our July theme around the world for Centers for Spiritual Living is pulled by vision. So, since there are a few people in the room who haven't seen the movie, I'm going to share the plot with everyone so that everybody kind of gets what we're talking about. This was written on Wikipedia. I didn't make it up. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And to remind everybody who even saw it Friday night, like some of the details. So, in 1986, Saru, who is a 5-year-old boy, lives with his elder brother Gadu and his mother and his younger baby sister in Kandwa, India. And I apologize if anybody else knows Indian dialect better than I do. But Gadu and Saru steal coal from freight trains to trade for milk and food. And one night, Saru just pesters his brother, who's going to go work overnight on the trains, and he persuaded him to let him come too. So Gadu refuses at first. He's like, no, you're too young. But then he finally relents, and they arrive at a nearby train station where Saru, as a 5-year-old, is too tired to work overnight and too tired to stay awake. So Gadu places Saru on a bench, and he tells him to wait for him to come back. Don't go anywhere. So Saru promptly just falls asleep, and when he wakes up, Gadu is not around, nowhere to be seen. So Saru searches the station, the train station, and he gets on an empty train as he's looking for his brother. And he falls asleep again in one of the compartments. But when he woke up, sometime later, the train was in motion and he was locked inside. So after several days, the train arrives in Calcutta, which is far away, and the 5-year-old Saru does not understand the local Bengali language. So he stands at the ticket counter and he tries to obtain a ticket home, but the attendant doesn't recognize the name of his village, which Saru says is Ganestale. And he spends the night in the station with some street children, but then he's woken up and they're forced to run when a group of men try to kidnap the children. So Saru continues to wander around the city before he came across Nora, a seemingly friendly woman who takes him back to her apartment. And she tells Saru that a man named Rama will help him find his way home. And Saru runs away. He sensed that Noor and Rama have sinister intentions, and he escapes Noor when she chases after him. So after 2 months of living near the Hora Bridge, Saru is taken to the police by a young, caring man. And unable to trace his family, they put him in an orphanage. 3 months later, Saru is introduced to Mrs. Sud, who tells him she has placed an advertisement in the local papers, but no one has responded. So she tells him that an Australian couple is interested in adopting him, and she begins to teach Saru basic English, and he moves to Hobart, Tasmania in 1987 under the care of Sue and John Brierley, where he slowly starts to settle into his newly adopted lifestyle. 1 year later, they adopt another boy, Mantosh, who has trouble adjusting to his new home, and he suffers from rage and self-harm attacks. So 20 years later, Saru is now a young man, and he moves to Melbourne, Australia, to study hotel management, and he starts a relationship with Lucy, who is an American student. And during a meal where they're sharing some food with Indian friends in their home, he comes across jalebis. This is a sweet delicacy that something triggers in his mind from his childhood. And so Saru reveals in conversation with these friends that he's not from Calcutta actually, he's been lost. He's been lost for more than 20 years. And his friends suggested that he use Google Earth to search for his hometown in India. So Saru commences his search. But over time, the stress of it, he disconnects with Lucy, who has become his girlfriend, and he's simply overwhelmed by the thoughts of emotions of what his family must have felt when he was lost for so long. So Saru visits his adopted mom, Sue, whose health is deteriorating, and he learns for the first time that she is not infertile as he thought, that she had actually chosen to help others in need through adoption, believing that there were already too many people on the earth and she could do more good by adopting him. So he reconciles with Lucy, and he spends a long time searching fruitlessly for his hometown on Google Earth. But one evening, while scanning Google Earth, he notices the rock formations where his mother worked, and he finds the area where he lived, the Ganesh Talai neighborhood of the Khandwa district. So he finally admits to his adopted mother that he's been searching, and she fully supports his effort. So Saru returns to his hometown in India, and with the help of a local English speaker, he has an emotional reunion with his biological mother and his sister. He also that day learns the fate of Gadu, his older brother, who was hit and killed by a train the very night that Saru got lost. So Saru's mother had never given up hope. She never moved away from this little village because she just knew Saru would come home. And the film ends with captions about the real Saru's return to India. This is a true story. Saru returned to India in February of 2012, and the movie features photographs of the real Australian family and footage of Saru introducing his adopted mother, Sue, to his Bengali mother in India. And they deeply appreciate Sue's care for her son. And Saru later learned that he had been mispronouncing his own name for all those years. His real name was actually Sharu, which translates to lion, which is where the title comes. So what a huge lion of a story, right? So where is God in this story, and how was the universal truth that God is everywhere illustrated in the movie? Because that's what I want to look at. So first of all, this movie, the story of Saru, is an example of the universally recognized hero's journey, isn't it? You know, a hero's journey is when a character who is somewhat naive or young sets out in life to find himself or herself, to find God, to find the internal qualities that we all have. And at the end of the hero's journey, the person then returns home with their newly gained wisdom. That's the full circle of a hero's journey. So Saru is the hero of the story for sure. But we're all the hero of our own story. And each one of us have had journeys of discovering who we are and what our strengths are, what our spiritual connection really is. So Saru, as an example of a hero, points out one of the truths about such a journey. Sometimes our hero's journey is chosen for us. Most of us step forward and declare ourselves on a journey. I'm going to learn about myself here. But Saru did not mean to go on a hero's journey at such a young age. He didn't mean to, and in such a scary and overwhelming setting. I don't know about you, but watching the movie, I was very stressed when this little boy was wandering around Calcutta. But sometimes we are forced into finding our own strength and growing up under circumstances out of our control. Falling asleep at the wrong moment on a moving train is really not the best way to go on a hero's journey. But sometimes we go in not ideal ways. So for each of us, we're never likely going to be physically lost. That's probably not going to happen to us. But we find ourselves on unchosen heroes' journeys during major transitions in our lives, don't we? When a relationship breaks down, or we are leaving our family of origin, or perhaps we've been fired from a job, or we've experienced the death of someone very important to us. Those kinds of life experiences test us, and they teach us what we're really made of, and how we can learn to lean on this higher power that's inside of us. And Saru's example teaches us several things that ring true spiritually, because it illustrates for us that God can be found in all situations. So in movies, I find that God, or the idea of spirit, shows up usually in symbols. So I begin to look for symbols in movies. And I believe in this movie, the director is trying to remind us that this is a spiritual experience. When constantly throughout the movie, there are sounds of Hindu or Muslim worshiping going on, the sounds of prayers. And they call to prayer through music, and that music is an undercurrent in the movie the whole time. And it's heard throughout the movie, especially at critical points in the story, that music will be playing in the background. And the spiritual quality was also illustrated through the butterflies and flowers in the Ganges River, and the presence of seekers that were under the overpass where Saru sleeps. And there was also this moment, if you remember in the story, he creeps up to one of the Hindu goddess or god statues where believers had left fruit and offerings for the gods. And he namasta's to the god, and he steals the food because he's starving. And it's just a moment where he's in gratitude, and God is definitely a part of that moment. So God also showed up as Saru's inner wisdom. So time after time, Saru called on his inner guide to get himself out of danger. He listened to his gut, didn't he? Several times. He listened. He turned into that intuition, or whatever you want to call it. Every time another person came into his experience, he checked himself. He was watching. He was thinking, is this person good or not good for me? So Spirit has put within each of us this connection, this inner wisdom, this connection to something bigger. And I think children are more in touch with it than we are. We are taught our whole lives to listen to voices outside of us. Somebody else knows better for us whether we're in a good situation or not. But we learn as kids to listen inside. And we've got to sometimes relearn that as adults. Like, we have an inner yes, we have an inner no. We know whether we should move forward or not if we turn within and listen. But too often we talk ourselves out of what we know. Too often we don't want to be rude. We don't want to inconvenience someone else. And we go along with things, and what happens? Somewhere down the road we go, dang it, I knew it. I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done this. We know. And so Saru listened. Listen. So always listen. God is within each of us. That inner nudge will tell us which direction. Another thing the movie illustrated so beautifully is that we all must rest and renew ourselves. Every time he felt safe, Saru fell asleep, didn't he? He fell asleep. He rested. He regained his resolve to survive. He slept on the train bench, and he slept on the train, but he slept on the streets. He slept on pieces of cardboard. He slept in the orphanage. He slept on a couch later in his life when he was doing the searching. He spent a lot of time in sleep. It seems that after every challenge, the movie would show him sleeping. Why? Why? I believe that our greatest wisdom comes when we are not consciously awake. When we are sleeping, or we're semi-conscious. Those moments between sleep and being fully awake, I call those holy moments because you can access a lot of wisdom in that kind of twilight state. You know, the pandemic forced all of us to take some time out and reevaluate our lives. How much energy we're exerting all the time. We were given plenty of time to rest. I don't know if you took that time, but I hope you did, because it was a time of renewal. But now most of our challenges are back, aren't they? Demands on our time, invitations, everything's kind of flying at us, new opportunities, all these things. But now that all of that is back, let's not forget Saru's example to rest and not stretch ourselves so thin in every direction. You know, sometimes I say to myself, I just need to let my consciousness go out of my body for a few minutes. I just need to lay down for 10 minutes and I'll be fine. And it really works if I could just get out of there. So the movie teaches us so many important things spiritually. And one of them is also to be willing to learn new things. Saru showed this inner willingness to learn. You know, maybe that's the 5-year-old in him, but that 5-year-old's in all of us. But he learned from other street children how to survive in the tunnels. He learned how to exist in an orphanage from all the other children, right? He learned English so that his circumstances could improve. I just loved him saying, Pepper, Pepper. He learned how to sail and how to be Australian. And he learned to use Google Earth and calculate train speeds and distances. He was just willing to learn whatever it took to get what he needed. And at some point along the way, at any point along the way actually, he could have refused to learn that new thing, to learn the skills necessary to thrive where he was. But he showed up with that beginner's mind and he allowed himself to be taught. And he was eager to learn new things. So be teachable. You know, God is always sending us teachers and information, so pay attention. You know, recognize when others are using skills that you don't have but would need. You know, I'm talking to myself on that one. You know, I don't really like to look foolish, and sometimes I pretend to not need to be taught things, but I do. You know, to be teachable. You know, Spirit calls us all to keep growing and learning and stretching and evolving. And these things all require us to have a willingness to learn and change. So open yourself up for that. Because your souls crave development and change, and learning is always a part of that growth. And watch for teachers, because teachers are placed on your path right when you need them. When you need to know something, you might use this information later in life, but the teacher shows up now, right? But I think the biggest lesson in this movie is this: never lose sight of your deepest desires, your inner vision for your life. I have never heard a story of persistence as strong as this story. He spent his entire childhood and early adulthood thinking and dreaming of his mother and his brother in India. It was a vision he kept alive in his mind for 2 decades. You know, I watched an interview with the real life Saru, and he says that the memories were all he had, and so he treasured them. Every time he was alone, he would think and dream of going home. He would seem to stop living his life right here and now and just be in his vision. But because he allowed that desire to just live underneath the surface of his life every day. I want to go home. You know, the movie shows him envisioning his mother in the rock quarry and envisioning his brother walking on the train tracks and the fields and the butterflies. He just kept the vision alive. His deepest desire was to go back home. And he kept that until a way was made clear. And what happened? A random discussion with his friends. And they introduced this idea of Google Earth. Google Earth had just been created, right? And Saru searched on it for 4 years before he finally discovered that water tower. He got lost in 1986 and went home in 2012, almost 26 years later. So stop for a minute and remember, what were your greatest desires when you were very young? You know, so often we're talked out of those desires. Most of us let them go and never revisit them. But perhaps you still desire what you wanted back then. Perhaps you don't. But whatever your deepest desires are, Understand that spirit does not withhold itself or any good from you. Stay open. Discuss your desires with others and watch for possible pathways to be made clear. The last thing I want to talk about is love, because God is love, and God is always available in that form. Relationships are everything. You know, we get to see Saru in a variety of relationships, don't we? Starting off with that loving relationship with his mom and family. But these formative relationships were so strong. The memories of them kept him motivated his entire life. He was lost for all those years, but the love remained strong and alive inside of him. He was thinking of his mother, and she was thinking of him. But he also developed key loving relationships with his adoptive family, didn't he? Even McMantosh, who was really difficult to love, even as just a viewer, but he loved his brother. We saw him receive love from lots of people who encouraged him in his search. And those relationships were sorely tested. Sometimes when you're holding a vision and other people aren't holding it, it really tests everybody around you, right? And after the story was told, the movie director allowed us to see that the original source of love survived. His mother and his sister got to meet his adoptive family in the end. And that gratitude was so thick, because relationships are everything. So honor the relationships in your life. Every one of them has served a purpose or is serving a purpose for you. And relationships are the avenues through which Spirit flows all of our good to us. If we're going to have anything in life, pretty much, it's going to come to us through relationships. And I want to share a footnote. You know, in interviews done with the real Saru during the Oscar season surrounding the movie, he revealed more than the movie could hold. He said that he visits his mother and sister regularly in India, and as a successful businessman, he has purchased them a new home and has helped their lives improve. And he's writing a book now about his two mothers and the relationship between his two mothers, and there might be another movie in the works, and I personally can't wait. But such a lesson in persistence and determination, isn't it? I don't think I'll ever forget it, and I bet you won't either. But in conclusion, I just want to encourage you to look for examples of spiritual truth all around you in life. What you read, what you watch, what you experience. Look for God as love and intelligence and guidance wherever you go. Because this is a spiritual universe that we live in. It's operating by principles we teach, and all major religions, science, and philosophy teach as well. Movies and books and videos and articles and TED Talks and everything, they're all talking about the wisdom that is universal. And there's only a few stories to tell, and one of them is the hero's journey. You can look for that everywhere. So if you enjoyed this kind of a lesson, let me know. We can always do movie and a message again. It was really fun. So thank you for watching the movie and for hopefully loving it as much as I did. And so it is. Thank you.